Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa, back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast and another snow day in Seattle. I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but I'm recording it in February, and we have, almost a foot of snow with more coming. Totally unheard of. But bottom line, I apologize if my sound quality is not as good. I did bring home a nice microphone in anticipation, but I'm still in a different kind of room and a different setup than usual. So here I am, back to talk about more topics that hopefully will be interesting at the least and helpful at the most in helping you have a better sex life with your partner. Today's topic is a really interesting one. I am speaking with Jim Fleckenstein, who is a sexologist, a researcher, educator, and coach with a ton of experience helping people with relationships and has a particular specialty in consensual non-monogamy. So I already did an episode earlier just about polyamory, which is one type of consensual non-monogamy. Today's is more of an overview of the three basic categories and how people might pick and what are the pros and the cons. And what are the kinds of resources and tools you need as you might be having these conversations or deciding to implement this in your life? So it's not a choice everyone is going to make. It's not going to be something that everyone is interested in for sure. But if you are, I think this episode's going to be helpful. And at the very least, hopefully you're going to find it interesting because there are an awful lot of people doing this these days. So even if it's not something that you're exploring in your relationship, chances are someone you know is. So it might be helpful, give you some perspective and some things to think about. So hope you enjoy it. Jim, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So this is an interesting topic, consensual non-monogamy. And, I know that's an umbrella term for a lot of different things. So would you help, me, the listeners understand, what are the different types, like what falls under that title?
There are three main divisions, really, in the world of consensual non-monogamy. And then there's an entire Venn diagram of variations and colors and flavors. But the three main divisions are polyamory, swinging, open relationships.
Okay.
And polyamory is a situation where more than one, although there are people who practice solo polyamory as well, but for our purposes, let's say more than one, okay, are involved in a relationship where there is allowed for emotional and sexual connection. And the two are not mutually exclusive, nor are they mutually reinforcing. You can be emotionally connected, sexually connected, both, neither, because there are asexual people who participate in that community as well. But the key component that separates it from the others is that possibility of emotional or amative connection. The other types of consensual non-monogamy generally don't allow for that. So That's the main distinguisher for polyamory. That's why amory, amor, is part of the name.
Right.
It is multiple loves.
Okay.
And some polyamorists get very defensive about the notion that we're all about love, not just that nasty sex stuff. That's getting better. The community's growing out of that, but they had a lot of identity issues in the way back when.
Yeah. Well, it's not like there's a council, right, of people deciding this.
Yeah. There's nobody handing down the rules on high on stone tablets. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
But that community is growing, and it does have a lot of subsets and other things as well. Swinging, which is probably the oldest visible spectrum, consensual non-monogamy, is couple-centric primarily.
Okay.
It is about a partner couple, usually married, though not always nowadays, because again, fewer people are getting legally married than once.
Right.
That's true. Who engage in sexual activities outside of the dyad, often together. At least they always tend to come and leave the event together.
Okay.
They may play together, or placed separately. And again, there's gradations and variations within that world. But the key difference there is they work very hard to establish an emotional wall and maintain the emotions within the dyad, the primary relationship. And they say for many people in the swing world, swinging is not an identity the same way polyamory is an identity for the poly people. It's what it is that we do.
Okay.
It's a thing that we do. It is an activity that we use to strengthen our marriage, to get our sexual needs satisfied. But it's always about being strictly subjected to the emotional primacy, if not emotional exclusivity, of the primary dyad.
Okay.
Okay, so that's swinging in a nutshell. And then the third major category is what are known as open relationships. And that, once again, tends to center around a dyad. And the participants in the relationship are free to seek sexual liaisons outside of that primary relationship. Once again, typically emotional connection is reserved for within the primary relationship. But unlike swingers, people in open relationships tend to operate independently. They may sometimes get together with a third person for a threesome or another couple for a foursome, but generally speaking, they tend to operate more independently. So, the Martian anthropologist looking at them through the telescope would see the open people looking much like the polyamorists in their behaviors, but their attitudes are very different from the polyamorists in that they, again, try to erect, and I emphasize try because human emotions are not always subject to our logical minds.
Yeah, they don't stay within the bounds and the rules,
no,
right?
They don't. But they try to erect barriers to a profound emotional connection because that jeopardizes, in their mind, the primary relationship. Yeah. So those are the three major subsets. And then again, there's all kinds of overlays. There's a huge parallel universe of same-sex relationships. Gay males especially have open relationships in many cases, heavily researched, decades of research around that. Lesbian same-sex relationships, less extensive than gay male, but out there nevertheless. The kink community, BDSM, bondage, discipline, sadism, masochism, has a flavor of both open relationships and polyamorous relationships with this kinky overlay. So there's that world. And then there's lots of other worlds that sort of interact and interface with these various things. But these are the three main types.
Okay, so why are people doing this? And I mean, these are big, wide questions, right? Mostly for my listeners. Sure. Why are people doing this? And how do people pick which type? What's the draw for couples towards one of these basic three setups?
A lot of it depends where they're at emotionally and what the emotional need or lack or add-on, because it's not always a lack. Sometimes it's an add-on.
Right.
It's a more than. It's not a need or a lack, but I want to add this level of richness to my life. And, you have to kind of drop back and go through the exercise of what is it that I am trying to attain here and how best to do that. Am I feeling like I would like to have a greater range of emotional connections in my life and amative connections in my life? Am I interested in more love in my life, for lack of a better word? Then you might gravitate more toward polyamory. And you could even do it, again, you could do polyamory in an asexual way. If sexuality becomes the Rubicon, then it ends up looking very much like intense platonic friendships.
Right.
But our society doesn't do a very good job of helping people draw boundaries. We now have this entire cottage industry around so-called emotional infidelity that looks very much like a platonic friendship.
Right.
But it is deemed threatening to the primary relationship. Well, polyamory just throws all that in the trash bin and says, no, I can connect at any way and in any level with whomever I choose as long as it's consensual on both sides. Both people who have an investment in our relationship have consented, and the people with whom I'm interacting have given full informed consent. No sneaking around, no secrets, none of that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, that's the difference, right, between polyamory and infidelity, whether it's emotional or physical. It's about transparency and agreement and honesty.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the touchstone, and it's the touchstone for all of these. I mean, clearly in swinging, where you're going out as a couple to do this, it's pretty hard to hide the fact that you're going out as a couple to do this.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, I thought this was a yacht club. No, it's,
Yeah, right. It's bridge night. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But in open relationships, again, there's a continuum. There's everything from the so-called don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
It's, okay, I will allow you to go do whatever you're going to do, but I don't want to know about it.
Right.
I don't know with whom. I don't want to know where. I don't want to when. And in many cases, they will set up boundaries. Some people call them rules.
Yeah.
I don't like rules because rules are rigid, and there are penalties for breaking rules.
Right.
Boundaries, you can cross a boundary, and then you have to be accountable for crossing a boundary. But it's not like there's necessarily a punishment associated with it.
Right.
So languaging can be important. But many couples will set up a situation where, again, don't ask, don't tell, but the boundaries are only when you're on travel, only when you're out of the country, only when, at a business convention, only with people we don't know, only one time and never a second time.
Yeah.
They put
only
all
away
these
from our home, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, all these conditions and boundaries around how it's carried on. But one of the universals, which again is one of the things that separates these, is the notion of, but don't fall in love.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Right.
And then there may be lesser rules like don't call them sweetheart, because that's my special word.
Yeah.
And things like that.
Yeah, or don't go to our restaurant, or yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And it's amazing the kind of things that will trigger people. There was once a guy that I knew, and he was in the local polyamory group, and he was recounting a situation where he found himself just beside himself with jealousy and anguish and so forth. And it wasn't because of sexuality. It wasn't because of emotional content. It was because his lover went to a foreign film with her paramour.
Oh.
And foreign films were their thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody knew that. It was strictly in his head. It hadn't been discussed or articulated. But he was like beside himself. They went to see a foreign film and I wasn't there and it was terrible. And it's like, come down off the ceiling. Let's have this conversation.
Well, and some of these tripwires, I suppose you don't know what they are until you run into them. Right? Like there's a certain amount we can anticipate or agree on up front, and then some of it's gonna take some work over the course of the experience, I'd imagine.
Right, exactly. And that's why, the polyamory mantra is, communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true in each one of these relationships. It's a necessary beginning to anything you do.
Yeah.
Because you have to begin to develop and continue to develop good communication skills.
Right.
Because without them, you're in trouble. It's not going to work very well for you. Because there's a lot of things that you have to talk about that in the course of polite conversation in polite society, we don't talk about, to our detriment, unfortunately.
Right.
But these things force you to talk about them.
And I would imagine people vary, they differ a lot between how much they want to hold something sacred for the primary dyad, whether it's foreign films or our restaurant or our bed, and then some people maybe much less so, right? Aren't looking to have anything that's sort of territorial.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, as you say, it is a work in progress. You might not think of anything in particular that would trigger you, and then again, something triggers you.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's involves the person. I just did a workshop on managing metamours, which is people who are lovers to your lovers. And I called it When Worlds Collide.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I talked about was sometimes you A, don't know what's going to happen, and B, what may be okay with person A may not be okay with person B.
Yeah.
Because your relationship with person A is different from your relationship with person B.
Right.
And that doesn't make you a bad actor. It makes you human. We all have these different levels of interaction and comfort with different people for whatever reason. Sometimes you simply can't articulate the reason.
Right.
But it's there and it's real. And so you have to make allowance for that.
Yeah.
It might be perfectly fine for Sally to sleep in my bed, but not for Bill.
Right.
Just can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, So you've got to cut yourself some slack.
Right. So how many people are doing this? I mean, certainly in my practice, right, in Seattle, it seems to me that more and more people are openly, consensually non-monogamous, that this is a growing trend, or at least that people are talking about maybe more than they used to. Mm-hmm. I mean, are there statistics around this?
There are some. Of course, they're imperfect because the gold standard for statistical research is a nationally representative sample. But when you're dealing with a hidden population that is still very highly stigmatized,
Yeah.
you can still lose your custody of your children. You can lose your job. You could lose a security clearance if you work in the defense industry or in the defense
Wow.
contractor. There are a lot of potential negative repercussions of being outed around this. And so many people don't trust surveys. They don't trust survey takers. So we know it is an underreported phenomenon.
Okay.
We see a lot of talk about it in the popular media, but we can't take to the bank any of the numbers that we have on it. But the numbers that we do have on it suggest that somewhere between 2 and 7% of the U.S. population either are or were in a consensually non-monogamous relationship.
Okay.
Put that in perspective, the LGBT community represents between 3.8 and 4.1% of the overall population.
Oh, wow.
So this is a substantial subset. If these numbers are to be believed,
Yeah.
this is a substantial subset of the American population.
Yeah.
One piece of research showed figures as high as 20% of the population, a younger single population, had participated in a consensual non-monogamous relationship, lifetime incidents.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big chunk of the population relative to some other groups that wield a fair amount of influence.
Yeah.
But this is still a hidden population.
Are there differences, and again, maybe you don't have statistics on this, but differences by age? Is it more common in the young people coming up now versus, the baby boomers? Or maybe different models of non-monogamy?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Different age cohorts seem to gravitate to different forms. And that's a function of that being an age cohort. As I said, swinging was the generally accepted history of swinging positions it as it's currently practiced, more or less, immediately post-World War II. So sometime in the late 40s to early 50s is when the swinging community began to coalesce and come into the fullness of its existence as it is today. So therefore, your boomers and your greatest generation people have had the longest term exposure to that form of non-monogamy. Then in the 60s, we began to get the free love movement and that sort of thing, and the rise of feminism and feminist consciousness and so forth, the rise of the LGBT, beginnings of the LGBT movement on the backs of the civil rights movement. And so then we began to see more of what we would today call polyamory or open relationships beginning to happen. So those late boomers, 1960s era boomers and in late 50s and so forth, and then whatever follows the boomers, Gen X or whatever,
right.
are going to move in that direction. And then today's younger people, millennials, Gen Zs, those sort of things, they are as likely to be polyamorous or in open relationships, less likely to be found in conventional swing world because they are waiting longer to get married. Fewer of them are getting married. And while the swing world has begun to relax its culture around you must be legally married because a non-married person represents a threat, that still is a powerful ethos in the swinging community.
Yeah.
So you see generally fewer younger people in the swinging community.
Okay. So how does choosing consensual non-monogamy affect relationships? It's probably all over the map, even as I ask the question. But
of course, it's always individual. It's a sample of one. How did it affect me? And my experience is going to be different than somebody else's experience, whoever that is.
But sort of what are the basic ways, categories of effects that we see? Maybe.
Right. The interesting thing is, of course, what research has been done, and there's been a reasonable amount of it, including some that I've done, is showing the information that is contrary to the conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom is this is terrible, this is the last refuge of a dying relationship, that you'll regret it in the morning, and so forth. And we're not seeing that at all. With one or two exceptions, and there are exceptions because, research is rarely monolithic. They can't decide whether the sun rises in the east without, some of the centers. Well, it depends where east is.
Right.
But generally speaking, what we are seeing is that people in these relationships report a great deal of satisfaction, relational satisfaction, They report a great deal of sexual satisfaction. And the research is very robust on the notion that sexual satisfaction does dramatically contribute to relational satisfaction. Those two are inextricably linked.
Right.
And that research is pretty robust. So to the extent that this is a means of getting sexual needs met, it definitely has a positive effect. My own research, we did a larger sample that we've broken out and published on a subset of elderly, and elderly is a guarded term, 55 plus.
Oh, gosh.
Not elderly.
I'm not going to tell you how old I am.
No, that's right. But they reported not only greater health and happiness and relational satisfaction and sexual satisfaction, and it was very clearly tied to the number of sexual partners they had over a period of time. And we compared them to a general social survey sample, and the consensually non-monogamous sample was uniformly no worse off in the worst case and substantially better off in the best cases, depending on the substrata we looked at, than their monogamous counterparts, ostensibly monogamous counterparts. Some other research, Terry Conley at University of Michigan and some of her folks have done some very interesting stratification work comparing monogamous, consensually non-monogamous, open, swinging, poly, and non-consensually non-monogamous, and found that there is definitely, in their work, a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Poly people do pretty well. Swingers are the most sexually satisfied and very happy they do.
Yeah.
But the open relationship people are at the bottom of the heap. They tend to be less happy, less satisfied, less sexually satisfied. So, but they're all still better than the non-consensually non-monogamous.
Well, yes. Yeah.
You know, those folks have some underlying challenges. The non-monogamy is probably not the part. It's a question of which is the chicken and which is the egg.
Right.
But even those who are strongly opposed to cheating, which on an ethical level, I suspect most of us are, but those who are dogmatically opposed without exception to cheating, found that many people in relationships that cheated were not in fact dissatisfied with the relationship. They just wanted something more or different. And Esther Perel's most recent work on infidelity, she takes the position, it's like you're not running from the relationship, you're running to who you think you want to be.
Yeah.
It's more about internal self-actualization, and you can still be in a relationship, but you have to note that you're a changed person and that the relationship has changed as a consequence of what you've done. But it's not always about the relationship or about your partner. It's sometimes about who you are or who you've become or who you aspire to be.
Yeah.
That you feel, rightly or wrongly, you can only attain through an affair. And of course, the consensual people say, no. You know, that you can be those things without having to do a bad thing.
Right. Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com. This is making me think about the word consensual, because I'm imagining some of the clients that I've worked with in my practice where they appear to be agreeing to this, but one person is really doing this out of fear of losing the relationship, or, whether it's overt pressure from their partner or just a sense of I might lose them if I don't agree. They're not really bought in themselves. And I generally see that go badly. So it's like, I don't know where that fits in the spectrum between consensual and not, but it seems like that would set people up for difficulty.
Yeah. Once again, you have to meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely some important steps that you have to take to make this work for you at all. And there are decision points along the way where you reach a situation where you're going to have to make a decision about how do I proceed from here. it's okay if in the early going there's differential engagement, because it's to be fully expected. Many couples can't agree on where they're going to go to dinner, much less something as profound as this. Okay, I mean, let's be realistic. There's two different people with two different sets of experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, religion, perhaps, and other things. So just because the first time you broach the subject it blows up doesn't necessarily mean the end of the conversation forever. There are ways to continue the conversation in a respectful and appropriate way. And again, one of the truisms in swinging, there's been a little bit of research on it, but one of the truisms in swinging has always been that the men initiate and the women maintain. The men think that they're going to suddenly encounter a bevy of beautiful women who are lusting after their bodies, and they have to get their wife to go along to access this.
Right.
And what they swiftly find out is that the women are the ones who are in control. They're the desired parties. They are the ones who are in control of the process. And in many cases, the men find that their fantasies are not fulfilled, but the women's fantasies they didn't even know they had are amply fulfilled. And so then the male party says, yeah, this isn't working so well for me. I think we ought to go back to being exclusive. And she's like, yeah, maybe later. So, that can happen is an initially reluctant partner can suddenly, grow into it.
Right.
And find that it works for them.
Right.
And likewise, there are people who do it and do it for a while, and then their circumstances change. They either consciously or for other good reasons say, you know what, it's time to transition out of this. Maybe permanently, maybe only for a while. If they're younger at a childbearing age, maybe it's like, hey, I want to stop and let's have a baby. Maybe there's a life thing. Hey, mom is getting older and getting ill and has to move in with us, and that's going to crimp our style across a wide domain of things. Maybe we need to back up on this. We can't go on those weekends. We can't go on those cruises anymore because we need to be here for mom. So there may be situational reasons as well as attitudinal reasons. But, one of the things I tell people is, they've got to educate themselves before having that conversation, and there's some really good resources for that. I strongly recommend that they make the effort to go to local support groups and meetup groups. In the BDSM world, they're called munches, and sit down with people in a non-sexual environment and just talk. Talk with people who've been in the trenches, who've experienced it themselves, probably had many of the same fears and trepidations and concerns and problems that you're experiencing right now, and hear how they overcame it. It may not work for you, but it may very well work for you. And one of the things it definitely does for you is it destigmatizes and demystifies it. It's like, you know what? Who are these weird people? And they're not weird people. They're the people who are sitting across the table from you. And maybe they are weird, but nevertheless.
But they're not all weird,
But they're not all weird. And they're not weird in the ways you think they might be weird. And that can be enormously empowering. It's like, you know what? Maybe this is okay after all. Maybe it's something I would be willing to try. Because I've had a conversation with people like me and they like it, or they had the same concern and they transcended it and this is how they did it. So I definitely encourage people to do that. I encourage people very strongly to find a supportive and knowledgeable, two very important words, counselor or therapist that they can trust, and to look to resources like the kink-aware professionals, the poly-aware professionals lists that are on the internet, to find someone who understands this, because you shouldn't have to educate your therapist on your dime about what it is you're doing. And once again, stigma is a very real thing, even in the therapy room. So you find someone who understands and is supportive. They don't have to be doing it, of course, no more than they have to be a skydiver to help somebody get over their fear of heights. But they have to understand enough to be supportive and help you with the challenges you're facing. And if that therapist or counselor is not so experienced, they need to refer out. You need to make that part of your screening process as a potential client. Have you had any experience with this, and what's the nature of it, and what's your take on this? Because, many therapists aren't very well versed. We're working on this in a lot of different arenas. I give presentations at the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, Therapists, AAMFT, lots of other places to try to help that process. And I've been doing it for a long time. But it's far from universal. But that's important, because once you have someone who understands and is competent, culturally competent around this, they're not going to stigmatize whatever problem you might have, whether it's money management, anger management, in-law issues, kids issues, whatever it is. It's not going to be because you're consensually non-monogamous.
Right.
It's because you have these other issues.
Right.
Whereas the bad cheater way out is, well, if you just stop this foolishness, you would be fine.
Yeah.
And there are people who still experience that in the real world every day. So self-education, being kind to yourself as you walk through this process, because like a fish can't describe water, it's very hard for us to step back from the surrounding environment that valorizes monogamy, that tells people that if they're not exclusive, then they're worthless. They make it a black and white dichotomy. Right. If you don't love only me, you must not love me at all.
Right.
I'm not good enough. They internalize self-loathing and things from this. And that's pervasive. Turn on the radio. Watch TV. It's pervasive everywhere. And so to step outside of that takes courage.
Yeah.
And it takes support. And then again, get professional help, competent professional help when you need it. That's very important too.
Is there anything else you can think of that might trip people up who are interested in, for those listeners who are practicing this, this is not going to be new to them, but for people that might be thinking about it or, having those conversations for the first time, is there anything else that might trip them up that you want to bring up?
Well, again, it's a matter of be patient, be forgiving. Like I said, I like the tools that I recommend. What I recommend, and you can see this, but our listeners can't. But my favorite go-to book is Opening Up.
Okay.
By Tristan Taormino, and it covers all types of relationships: BDSM relationships, poly relationships, open relationships, swinging relationships, touches on same sex. It's very comprehensive, and I like this as an opener. A lot of people say read The Ethical Slut by Easton and List.
Right.
It's a good book. The first edition is very dated. It's very left coasty, and it comes from the lesbian community. The third edition, which is recently out, is better.
Okay.
But it's still more anecdotal. I like Tristan's approach. Another new reference work that I like a lot is Designer Relationships by Mark Michaels and Patricia Johnson. It's much thinner. It's much more accessible. But both of those works have chapters in them about how to broach this and pitfalls to watch out for. And then, one of the things we don't talk very much about is the idea of what happens if you've already cheated. Is there a way to recover trust, to rebuild a relationship, and maybe keep it open, maybe transition it to an ethical relationship from what started as an unethical relationship? And one of the better tools for that is Tammy Nelson's The New Monogamy.
Okay.
It's what happens after infidelity, after the affair. Can you redefine your relationship?
Okay.
Tons of checklists, self-quizzes, lots of good stuff in Tammy's book that people, if they're coming into this post-affair, or if they're on the verge of having an affair and would rather not do that transgressive thing and maybe try to redirect that energy in a positive way before something bad happens, this is a very useful tool for them that I recommend a lot.
Okay. I'll put links to all of those in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful for people.
Yeah.
And you have to meet people where they're at. Again, differential interest in this is okay to a point.
Right.
It's to be expected to a point. But what happens is if you're going down this path and you've gone down this path for a reasonable amount of time, and reasonable varies from person to person. But, if you see very clearly at some point that one partner is just not on board, they're dragging their feet, they really are not cut out for this, and that's okay. There's no implication that everybody should do this.
Right.
I don't like to say, well, this isn't for everybody, I don't want to put a big disclaimer on it, which a lot of spokespeople do. I think that's mistaken too. I think it turns this into something that's like a major work, but for many of the people who are doing, it's not a major work. What I hear from a lot of people is like, I've been this way my whole life. I was never not this way. It's intrinsic to me. Is it an identity or an orientation? Nobody knows. We're still talking about what that means.
Right.
But there's a lot of people for whom this is like falling off a log. So I'm not going to say this is a terrible, huge undertaking and, it's not for everybody and don't try this at home, kids. I'm not going to say that, because I think with the right tools, many, many more people could do this and do it very successfully and be very happy and fulfilled in doing it.
Yeah.
But if you happen to end up in a situation where your partner is someone who's not that, and that's okay too. That's another one of those decision points.
Right.
Where you have to say, all right, am I willing to give up this notion, this dream, this desire? All of our literature on commitment is inextricably tied to the notion of sacrifice. And my own theory around that is it's a legacy of the Judeo-Christian philosophy, where sacrifice is everything. And so you have to decide for yourself, how much are you willing to sacrifice for this relationship? Is it time to transition into something that is more fulfilling and something that will meet your needs? Or are your needs such that they can be restrained and you can continue on? If everything else is working fine for you, you can probably continue in the relationship forever without this.
Right.
That's okay. But only you can decide that.
Right.
And that's again where a helpful therapist comes into play. They're going to walk you through your thought processes, your needs, your desires, your motivations as an unbiased third party and say, all right, so where does this go? Where does this leave you? What can we do to move forward in whichever way we end up moving forward?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for people to do that on their own without help.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I just sort of want to throw out there the idea that some people get a lot out of commitment and monogamy, and some people get a lot out of non-monogamy, and there's not a value judgment or a hierarchy to this. Like sometimes I think people get a message that they're not evolved somehow, or they're, repressed or thwarted or, handicapped in some way if they're monogamous, as opposed to that could be also a very conscious choice.
Well, and that's the important part is, again, that fish in the water situation is like, let's surface this and let's see if we're doing this because that's just what people do, or we're doing this because it's what we've freely chosen to do.
Yeah.
And, you make that commitment to whatever form you take every day.
Yeah.
When you open your eyes in the morning, it's like, what am I going to be today?
Yeah.
And you have to be affirming of that choice, but it needs to be a choice. It needs to not be a default setting somehow.
Right. Right.
Because we know for a fact there's way too many people in this world who are unhappy and unfulfilled because they think they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And that's not narcissistic in the least. That's just looking to fulfill Maslow's hierarchy, that we want to be fulfilled and what will fulfill us. And as long as, and first you do no harm, it's what will fulfill you, what will make you happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. Where can people learn a little bit more about you or get in touch if they want to?
Sure. I have a website. It's www.affirmativeintimacy.com. That's my coaching practice.
Okay.
I have a business partner who's a professional therapist. I'm a coach and a researcher and an educator. I will sit down and help people, but I don't have any credentials to make it official. So she does. So that's why we partner and we co-present on things. But I reach the broader community. My target audience is anybody who feels like they need help in a relationship. But I've done a lot of work in and research around the non-monogamous community for the last 25 years. So those folks, I'm especially equipped to help. But I feel like my techniques and approaches would be valuable to anybody. And that was kind of the interesting discovery for me, was that the things I was using to help people who were non-monogamous would work with anybody.
Right. Surprise, surprise. Being in a relationship is being in a relationship. So
it pretty much is. Pretty much is. Yeah. It's that earn your wings every day.
Right.
Whether it's one lover, 2 lovers, 10 lovers, or no lovers. It's all the same.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Oh, my pleasure, Jessa. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, There are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.